The rest of the story. Henry stood at the edge of the runway watching as the small airplane taxied toward him. The sun was setting over the airfield, casting long shadows across the tarmac. At 63 years old, he still felt a thrill every time he saw an aircraft take flight or touch down. Some things never change. That's the last one for today, said Frank, the airfield manager, coming to stand beside him. You heading home soon? Henry nodded, his eyes still fixed on the plane. In a bit. Just wanted to watch her come in. What few people knew about Henry was that he hadn't always been just an aviation enthusiast. His story began decades earlier in a small town in Missouri, where as a young boy he would spend hours gazing at the sky, dreaming of flight. By the age of 14, Henry was washing airplanes at the local airfield in exchange for flying lessons. His parents didn't have the money for such extravagances, but the airport owner saw something in the boy's eyes, a passion that couldn't be dimmed. You've got the touch, his flight instructor had told him after his first solo flight. Some people learn to fly. You were born to fly. Henry's talent was undeniable. When other pilots struggled with turbulence or visibility, Henry seemed to have an innate sense of how to handle the aircraft, as if it were an extension of his own body. He understood the wind, could read the clouds, could feel the airplane communicating with him through the controls. After high school, Henry joined the military, where his skills were quickly recognized. He became a test pilot, pushing the boundaries of what aircraft could do. Never saw anyone fly like that before, one of his commanders commented, after watching Henry recover from what should have been an unrecoverable spin. It's like you and that machine have some sort of understanding. It was during this time that Henry met his wife, Claire. She worked in the administration office on base, and they'd cross paths when he came to file his flight reports. Aren't you afraid? She asked him once, after he'd returned from a particularly dangerous test flight. Henry smiled. Not of flying, I'm more afraid of not flying. They married 6 months later, and Claire learned to live with the knowledge that her husband's passion for flight would always be a part of their lives together. When the military program ended, Henry transitioned to commercial aviation. His reputation preceded him, and he quickly became one of the most respected pilots in the industry. Colleagues marveled at his calm demeanor during emergencies, his precise control in difficult conditions, his deep understanding of aerodynamics and aircraft systems. How do you stay so calm? A young co-pilot asked him once during severe turbulence that had the rest of the crew white-knuckling their seats. Because I know this aircraft, Henry replied simply, and I know what I'm capable of. This confidence was tested one December evening in 1978, when Henry was captaining a flight from Denver to Portland. Shortly after takeoff, multiple systems began to fail. The aircraft, normally so responsive to his touch, began to fight him. The co-pilot looked at him with panic in his eyes. What do we do? Henry's voice remained steady as he worked the controls. We fly the airplane. Always fly the airplane. For the next 30 minutes, Henry engaged in a dangerous dance with the damaged aircraft. The fuel gauges dropped at an alarming rate. Hydraulic systems were compromised. The landing gear indicator showed a possible failure. With 189 souls on board and dwindling options, Henry made the decision to attempt an emergency landing. Air traffic control cleared all other traffic as Henry guided the wounded aircraft back toward the airport. The runway appeared before them, a narrow strip of concrete that seemed impossibly small from their altitude. I don't think we can make it, the co-pilot said, his voice tight. We will, Henry responded, his hand steady on the controls. Just follow my lead. What followed was a masterclass in airmanship. With minimal functioning systems, Henry used his understanding of the aircraft's handling characteristics to establish a stable approach. He had to feel the aircraft's response, relying on instinct as much as training. The touchdown was firm but controlled. As the aircraft rolled down the runway, the passengers, unaware until that moment how close they had come to disaster, erupted in applause. An investigation later revealed that multiple mechanical failures, any one of which could have been catastrophic, had occurred almost simultaneously. The report concluded that only the exceptional skill of the captain had prevented a tragedy. Henry never spoke much about that night. When asked about it, he would shrug and say, I was just doing my job. But those in the aviation community knew differently. They understood that what Henry had done was extraordinary, a testament to his unparalleled skill and composure under pressure. Years passed. Henry continued flying until mandatory retirement age, amassing over 35,000 flight hours. Even after retirement, he couldn't stay away from airplanes. He became a flight instructor, passing his wisdom and passion to the next generation of pilots. Flying isn't just about moving the controls, he would tell his students. It's about understanding the air, reading the sky, becoming one with the aircraft. His reputation grew. Pilots who had trained under him would tell stories of his uncanny abilities, his deep understanding of flight, his patient teaching style. Many credited him with making them not just competent pilots, but excellent ones. As he aged, Henry's health began to decline. Arthritis made it difficult for him to climb into a cockpit. His eyesight wasn't what it used to be. Eventually, he had to give up instructing, though he still visited the airfield almost daily, watching the planes take off and land, offering advice to anyone who asked. Now, standing at the edge of the runway as the last flight of the day taxied in, Henry felt a familiar pang of longing. Even after all these years, the desire to be up there among the clouds had never left him. Frank glanced at his watch. "Well, I'm heading out. You coming?" Henry shook his head. "I'll stay a bit longer." After Frank left, Henry walked slowly toward the small aviation museum at the edge of the airfield. Inside, among displays chronicling the history of flight, was a special exhibit dedicated to famous pilots. Henry paused before one display in particular. The photograph showed a younger version of himself in a cockpit, smiling confidently at the camera. Beside it was a plaque that read Aviation Aviation. Certain names stand out as exemplars of skill, courage, and innovation. Among these, one man is known not just for his extraordinary flying abilities, but for his humility and dedication to advancing the science of flight. His famous quote, "Rules are good, but they should never replace thinking," has become a mantra for pilots worldwide. Asterisk. Henry smiled slightly at the display. The museum curators had wanted to include more: the medals, the awards, the newspaper headlines about the near disaster in 1978. But he had insisted on keeping it simple. A young boy and his father entered the museum, breaking Henry's reverie. The boy stopped in front of the display, eyes wide with recognition. "Dad, look, it's him. It's really him." The boy tugged at his father's sleeve, pointing excitedly at Henry. "Can I ask for your autograph, sir?" Henry chuckled. "Of course you can, young man." The father looked apologetic. "I'm sorry to bother you. My son is obsessed with aviation history. He's read every book about you. It's no bother at all." Henry replied, taking the notebook the boy offered. "What's your name?" "Michael, sir. I want to be a pilot just like you when I grow up." As Henry signed the notebook, the boy peppered him with questions about famous flights, about what it felt like to break records, about how he had managed to land that damaged aircraft back in 1978. Henry answered patiently, thinking how similar this boy was to himself at that age, full of dreams about soaring through the skies, fascinated by the miracle of flight. When the boy and his father finally left, Henry remained in the museum a while longer, looking at the displays chronicling the history of aviation. So much had changed since he first took to the skies, yet the fundamental joy of flight remained the same. Outside, the airfield had grown quiet. The sun had set, and the runway lights twinkled in the darkness. Henry took one last look at the sky, vast, endless, still calling to him after all these years, and then walked slowly to his car. Few who passed him on the street would recognize this unassuming elderly man. Fewer still would know the full scope of his contributions to aviation, his numerous records, the lives he had saved, the boundaries he had pushed. But in the world of flight, his legacy was secure. His techniques were taught in flight schools around the globe. His emergency procedures had become standard protocol. His name was mentioned with reverence by pilots young and old. For this humble man from Missouri had not only changed how we fly, he had changed how we think about flight itself. His methodical approach to testing, his emphasis on understanding the why behind every procedure, his insistence that pilots should think beyond checklists. These principles had shaped modern aviation safety. The boy who once watched planes for flying lessons
had become one of the most influential figures in aviation history. The test pilot who pushed the boundaries of flight had helped establish the lengths of flight, had helped establish the lengths that kept passengers safe. The airline captain who had saved 189 lives had trained thousands of pilots who would go on to fly millions of passengers safely to their destinations. When people asked him about his accomplishments, Henry would typically respond with his characteristic modesty. He'd briefly respond with his characteristic modesty. He was telling it to what I love, but these are those two dates. It was skill, dedication, and an unquenchable passion for flight that had defined his macabre. Now you know the rest of the story about the story, and this, Sanedo became a legend in aviation, whose innovations in flight testing assuaged and flight testing its diminished. In aviation, whose innovations in flight testing established, still used today, whose cool-headed emergency landing agency, his maidenness, his abilities to but he's never refused.
You know the rest of the story about the man born Neil Alden Armstrong, who would not only shape aviation history, but would take that one small step that represented a giant leap for mankind. And now you know the rest of the story.